The client's problem is almost always the perceived solution they think they need. They're always looking for a way of solving the problem, but when they transform and relate totally differently, they don't need to solve the problem. The irony is, you can get paid a lot of money as a change worker to essentially show them that they don't have to do anything.
Hey there, how's it going? This is James Tripp introducing a longer video here. This is a longer piece of content. In this video, I'm having a conversation with a chap named Howard Cooper, who is a seasoned change work practitioner that I first met a number of years ago as a guest on his podcast, which he's no longer running, but I think all the content's there, which was called the Rapid Change Works podcast. Now, the reason I'm talking to Howard here is because I've ended up bumping into Howard a lot in the real world over the last few months. We were both on James Tripp's Spiral Somatics training, and I saw Howard again at the UK Hypnosis conference. We had a lot of conversations about things. And Howard was sharing with me his willingness ladder approach to creating shifts and change in people. And it particularly struck me as of value because one of the principles I operate by in a lot of the change work that I do is the principle of what you cannot be with will not let you be. Right? There are certain realities, there are certain things that people are unwilling to be with. They're unwilling to be with certain experiences. Okay, so they start to react against them and try and get away from them. They get into struggle with themselves and argument with reality. They're unwilling to be with certain judgments people might lay upon them. They're unwilling to be with certain thoughts and ideas, right? And when people are unwilling to be with things, they have a neediness for those things not to show up, right? And of course, I don't know, there's something weird, like the more you're trying to avoid something, the more it shows up. So people end up constantly trying to control themselves, control their minds, control their lives, because they're not realizing yet that they're actually okay. And a lot of the things they're struggling with and they're struggling against actually don't really pose any threat to them. It's all a kind of an illusion in that sense. And this has been a kind of cornerstone of how I've worked, or at least a part of how I've worked for a very, very long time now. So a lot of what Howard was talking about when we got into conversation was very resonant for me. And he let me have a look at his willingness ladder material, and frankly, it was excellent. And I got a lot of value from it. It's really great to watch Howard work in his willingness ladder material, because you're not only seeing somebody running a process, you're seeing somebody working exquisitely with ongoing feedback loops with their client. Okay, so fantastic in terms of a sort of masterclass of change-oriented communication. I was going to say transformative communication, but that sounds like a kind of highfalutin term. So I'm going to avoid that. But it's really, really fantastic stuff. It really is a masterclass watching Howard work. So I wanted to get Howard on, have this conversation about this. I know Howard's got a training coming up, I think in January. I'm being a bit vague here, but if I'll get the dates for that and I'll put them in the comments or in the about section probably, so you can check that out if you like what you hear here. And I will thoroughly endorse Howard's work. He's a very seasoned practitioner. He has a lot of insight and he has a very interesting personal journey as well. I've said enough, I think, so let's just dive in. Here is the conversation with Howard Cooper on transcending anxiety with the willingness ladder. Okay, Howard Cooper, welcome to my modest YouTube channel. Appreciate you being here. People watching this who don't know who Howard is, I first met you actually when are you still doing it, your Rapid Change Works podcast?
No, that's, I did do it for about 3-4 years, started back in 2017, but yes, it's now petered out, but the content's still there. But yeah, that's when we first connected.
I'm just going to say for the people here, Howard, what would you describe yourself as? I would say you're a change work guy. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best thing, because I just don't quite sit comfortably with the frame of hypnotherapist or hypnotist or NLP or anything like that. It's more about just change work and agent of change.
Right.
James Bond,
Yeah, I kind of like that agent of change thing. That's why my other podcast, or for my YouTube channel, I've got the podcast, which is Agents of Everything.
Right.
Because that's like the idea, because I love NLP and I love stuff like that, but it was that idea of I never got into it to be an agent of change in an office. right? Even though I am kind of much of the time now, but I got into it to be, and I was ranting to my wife. I was saying, I didn't get into this to be an agent of change in an office. I got into it to be an agent of change in the world, not just an agent of change, an agent of everything. I thought, there it is, agents of everything. But you and I both have a kind of NLP background and this kind of thing. And as I say, first time we met, you got in contact with me and said, will you come on my podcast, which is the Rapid Change Works podcast. At that time, you were, correct me if I'm wrong, you were very much a kind of NLP guy at heart. Is that a fair thing to say?
Very much so. I was very looking at how do people do the problem, and can we change the rep systems and the programs that they're running. That was kind of my go-to patterns, I would say.
Right. And also, if my memory is serving me rightly, I remember you talking about the concept of the podcast, which was that you'd had experiences of sort of going through longer term therapy and spending a lot of time, maybe a lot of money, but not necessarily getting results for yourself. And then could you say something about that? Because I think that's
I mean, look, my background started back when I was 15 years old, when I was essentially diagnosed as having a severe panic attack and anxiety disorder.
Right.
And spent 3.5 years with the week in, week out, seeing a very nice lady who really all we did every week was talk about how shit I felt every week. And at the end of which I got her theory as to why I was like I was. And I had this moment and I was like, oh, is that why you're saying I am like I am? And she went, yes, Howard. And I've known that for 3.5 years, but you had to get there yourself. And I went, well, what now? Because I'm still having panic attacks and anxiety. And she was like, yeah, but now you know why. And I just remember feeling so angry because at no point did I ever really care why.
Yeah,
I cared why in the sense of people had led me to believe that if I understood why, it would go away. But upon realizing it doesn't work that way, it was like, well, why are we doing this? Why can't we? So I became fascinated with things that promised what I would call more solution-focused methods. Let's not focus on the why we have problems, but the how do we do problems? How do we engage with our thinking in a particular way? And that's kind of what put me on the path. And I just loved the idea that, and this is after I got a lot better quite quickly, using some of these ideas, that change amongst lots of the, I would call muggles, lay people who don't spend time in the therapy world, kind of have this idea that we have to go to some root cause and we have to spend years and years and years with a man with a goatee who's stroking his chin and saying, did you ever dream of fish when you were 12? And doing like wild explorations in the hope that maybe something will happen. And I then ended up over in America filming a pilot TV show. And this was the moment where my Rapid Change podcast was born, where they set me up with 3 people to work with. And one was a water phobic who nearly drowned when he was 5 years old. Now, 35 years later, can't get any water. He was just super responsive. I didn't do anything particularly dramatic or particularly impressive, therapeutically speaking. It was a bog standard fast phobia cure. Yeah. And he was just super responsive and in front of cameras, in front of people. 10 minutes later, he went round the back, jumped into the swimming pool, came out beaming, and I thought, this is it. I'm going to be a star. I'm going to have my own TV show. This is amazing. Like, this is it. This is like the one client you really want at that moment in your life. Like, because they're not all like that, as we know. And they sent me the footage after of the other people that I'd worked with, and I got good results with all of them. But he was the one. I'm like, this is where the money is. Yeah. And they said, we've cut him out of the show.
Right.
Because, and the phrase they said was, they went, we've cut him out because real change doesn't happen that quickly.
Of course.
The network will think we're making it up, we're lying, and it lacks credibility. So it was at that moment that, in fact, my entire brand of Rapid Change Works was born. And it was really a fuck you to the production company who said Rapid Change can't work. And I was like, well, no, Rapid Change works. Right. And that was where the podcast was born out, and my fire was lit, as it were.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, just to reverse you up. Yeah. And the reason I'm asking these questions, Howard, is because you've been on a journey, to use that metaphor, and you work in a different way now. from how you used to work. And obviously you were getting good results before. And I'm kind of curious about this journey. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about this. So I want to just reverse back, because you talked about having had the experience in therapy yourself and spending 3 years to get to this point of discovering for yourself why you had the problem. How did you get into, what took you to NLP? Were you just looking around at that point going, there's got to be something else, and you found NLP, or was there some fortuitous event or something that brought you to NLP? What was happening there?
I daren't tell you, for fear of being mocked and laughed.
Well, that's
go
always,
on then.
Always the best content.
I came across Tony Robbins.
Okay. Yeah.
And ended up, after seeing what was an impressively charismatic, motivational speaker, and someone bought me a book, Notes from a Friend, which was really, now I look back, it's the beginning of a sales funnel.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll give you a free book.
Yeah.
And that will make you realize that there's more out there. And so I went on Unleash the Power Within, a 2-day training.
Cool.
Just walked across hot coals. Oh man. But I got swept up with it. And the thing that I look back at now that for me was the shift was I spent 3.5 years with someone who basically was implying that I was a victim to all of this anxiety. And suddenly there was this guy who's like, 10 feet tall, incredibly impressive, charismatic guy who had this other message, which was, you can control your thinking. You're not a victim to it anymore. Yeah. And I think that was just so like, you can control your thinking. Oh my God, this is amazing.
Right. Yeah.
Where has this been all my life?
Yeah.
And that was the message. And I started researching, well, what does he do? And what was his training and where did he go? It was NLP. So I started researching about how do I get good at this thing, NLP. And of course, I've been a big believer in you track down the people who are at the top. And at the time, I thought it was Richard Bandler. I say at the time, I thought it was Richard Bandler. Yeah. I'm careful with how I stress that. And I went and did the training. But that was my kind of route into that world. Right. And it's kind of like very much, you can control your thinking. What an amazing thing to discover.
Yes. And I think that's opening a loop that we might be closing down a little later on.
Yeah.
But I think there's an interesting thing in that a lot of people, you said you don't want to necessarily admit it that you did the Robbins thing. A lot of people came into NLP through Tony Robbins. A lot of people came in through Darren Brown. That was my route in, is seeing Darren Brown and going, wow, look, what is this guy doing? I think in 2001, 2002, something like that. But a lot of people, I've never been into Tony Robbins. And I hear a lot of people who are raging Tony Robbins fans, a whole bunch of other people that just say he's like, running this cult, or it's just some pyramid sales thing, and they do him down. And a lot of people say that these events, they pump you up, and then then the tire deflates afterwards, and you're not necessarily left with a lasting change. But the interesting thing about what you're saying there, it seems to me there's something, I was going to write a book a few years ago called The Power Switch. And then I was kind of looking on Amazon, and it turned out that there was a kind of BDSM novel called The Power Switch. So I thought, I can't call my book The Power Switch.
I couldn't possibly corroborate whether that's true or not.
Yeah. Well, you can go on Amazon, but I'm not saying you should. Okay. Yeah. Right? It could be a dark tunnel you end up getting pulled into. So I don't want to be responsible for that. But like this idea that, because I had this big shift when I was sort of 19, I used to be what I would call an absolute victim. I used to think that I was a victim of everything. I was the way I was, and there's nothing I could do about it, and my life sucked, and the world was placing demands upon me, and it wasn't fair. I had this moment where I had this kind of realization: the world is not going to reorganize itself to suit my needs. Like, this is the way it hit me. So I have to do something. So there was, for me, a stepping into my power to go, and I didn't know what I was going to do, but I just knew that it was down to me. There's a thing that Nathaniel Branden says. He says, the big shift comes to people when they realize no one's coming. It's down to them.
Right.
There's a funny story he tells in one of his books. He says he was running a group and he was doing this no one's coming piece, and somebody said, but Dr. Branden, you came. He said, yes, I did, but I came to tell you that no one's coming.
I like that.
which is great. But this point of sort of, to use maybe some kind of cheesy self-development terms, stepping into your power, realizing it's down to me, there is something I can do about this. That seems to me that's something that you got from that seminar that put you on a path. It wasn't just pump up your tires and then down it deflates. And
absolutely. And whilst I am, almost for comedy value, slightly downbeat about, oh yes, it was Tony Robbins. Listen, the guy has done some amazing stuff and influenced lots of people, and I wouldn't be doing the work I'm doing now, and it affected me in a very pervasive, powerful way for the better. But I also think that we can't throw out, because of that, all of the things that I also think don't quite sit right. So I think it's more shades of gray, and being able to openly say, look, there are some amazing things and some very skillful things that he does. And also, I think there are some things that I think are a bit dubious about. And I wouldn't work that way or endorse that way, knowing what I know now.
Yeah. So there's something you said there about controlling your thoughts, and we're going to come back to that. Come back to that in a little while. When you were doing the rapid change work stuff, when I first met you, you seemed to me to be very much a kind of NLP guy in the main. And it seemed to me very clearly at the time that you were like pretty clear that this was good stuff and you were getting good results. Now, you don't work necessarily that way anymore. Obviously, you've still got a lot of the skills that you had. I've listened to you work. I've watched you work, and I can hear things you're doing with your language in order to draw people in certain directions. I can see that you're paying attention to the shifts that are occurring in your clients. You're not just kind of plowing through some process with no attention to feedback or anything like that. So I can watch you work and I can see a lot of NLP skills, but I can also go, well, this has obviously got a different base from classic NLP, what you're doing now. But given that you were getting good results with NLP, in fact, look, before I ask this question, let me just ask you this. How are you working now that's different from how you were working when you were doing the Rapid Change Works podcast and when we first met and you were very much an NLP guy? What's different?
It's a really good question. And in so many ways, I feel like I've done a massive 180, like a huge 180. And for me, one of the beautiful things about the podcast was talking to people like yourself and lots of other people. It kind of went into the melting pot of, rather than just this single line of NLP and this is just what we do and how we do it, I became exposed to so many different ideas and concepts and ways of working. And I came across the work of Jørgen Rasmussen, who we kind of connected, and he had a way of working which he coined the psychological illusion model. And I watched him demo it at one of the early UK hypnosis conventions, where he ostensibly removed trauma. That's a bigger conversation for another time. But someone who said, look, I got this traumatic response, and he went through a process, and it was so different to anything I'd seen before. And I couldn't even track it really. It was just so outside of my normal frame of but yet the result was there. It was palpable. There were different shifts I was noticing. And none of that worked the way I thought things worked. In fact, it's coming at it from a totally different point of view. And so it's more just curiosity of how on earth does that work? So I invited him and brought him over under the Rapid Changeworks brand to the UK in 2018. I think it was May. And he did a 3-day training for the first time in this psychological illusion model. And I literally just sat just with my mouth open the whole time going, oh, because it made so much sense to me. And I think it wasn't just that, I think we spoke about this before at the last convention when we were there. But it's like, I was doing lots of different bits and pieces and suddenly there was like an overarching theme or idea that my brain just went, it all slots together in a way that allows me to work much more freely without having to, I'm going to do this bit now or this bit.
Yeah.
Actually, there's an overarching idea. So it was this idea of not getting caught up in our thoughts or seeing through the illusion of thinking. And I've kind of been going down that rabbit hole, which for a long time now. And the funny thing for me is if I look at myself and the way in which I worked before and after, it's like, so I'll give you a really good example of this. Working with a spider phobic from the NLP days. Make the image. And when you see that image, is it, it's scary, right? Oh, make it smaller and further away. What's the difference? Oh, yes. Yeah. That really makes a difference. That's good. Oh, yeah. Great.
Yeah.
So, isn't it cool when you make it smaller and further away? It makes a big difference. And then I compare that to now, like make the image of like a tiny little, of a big dog, teeth, bearing. How's that feel? And if they say that it's better when it's smaller, I'm like, oh no, this is terrible news. It hasn't worked. Whereas before it was like, if it's better when it's smaller, that's good news. Now, if it's better when it's smaller, the problem is it's still implying that thought itself is a threat. I want them to be able to see big, scary dog in their mind, but know that they're just making shit up so that they have no physical response.
Yeah.
It's just so funny that it's like the bigger and scarier the image is, the better it is for me now. Whereas before it was totally the other way around.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that make sense? I'm not explaining that.
No, it does. It makes sense to me. The reason I'm kind of like,
I know,
processing a second line of thought while you're saying that is because this is particularly interesting to me. I've known Jørgen since 2010.
Yeah.
And pre-psychological illusion model. But Jørgen at the time was still very much influenced by he introduced me to some things that were quite significant for me. At the time I met Jørgen, I was a hypnotherapist, NLP guy. That was my shtick. And the stuff that Jørgen introduced me to at the time that made a really big difference to me was the rational emotive behavior therapy stuff from Albert Ellis.
Yeah.
And to an extent, the work of Byron Katie as well.
Yeah.
But the REBT stuff really had a big impact on me. And that was a point in my own change work, my own development as a change worker. I had a few points where things really shifted, and the REBT thing was a point where things really shifted, because there's a thing in there about not being resistant to things, like learning to bring things down from musts to preferences, and just to like be able to be with things instead of going, no, they must be this way. So you've got that with this sort of, well, we've got to make the picture smaller and further away. It mustn't be big. It mustn't be big and in your face, so to speak. So I really get that. And I also, speaking for myself, I went through a big phase. I got into the 3 principles stuff as well, which has been an influence on the psychological illusions model. And I kind of got into that separately. And I remember having conversations with Jørgen and discussing what we were doing with that and what we were doing differently with it. Yeah. When I got into 3 principles, for a while, I thought, this is it. I mean, I can apply this to anything. I don't have to be thinking about, the old thing in NLP is if what you're doing isn't working, do something different, anything different. It's like, I want to have something that informs me as to what to do differently. Not just go, oh, well, that didn't work. I'll try this one.
Yeah.
So I liked the idea of having this underpinning framework that kind of made sense of everything. And I liked the 3 principles, and I really got deep into that. And I got pretty good at doing 3 principles-esque facilitations for people and bringing in some of my other skills and doing this kind of thing. And I thought that I had the Holy Grail. I really did. I completely, and I'm not, by the way, this isn't leading up to, and therefore I think I was all wrong. I still have got immense value from that and still bring so much of it into the work that I do. But I thought, like, this is it. I got it, the one solution, all of this kind of thing. And then I got this client come along and he booked me for 6 months coaching. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to go through the 3P stuff. He's going to learn about the nature of thought. He's going to fall out of all of his anxieties. Everything's going to be great. Everything's going to be fantastic. So the guy turns up, and then he reveals to me, which he hadn't revealed before, that he'd already had extensive coaching from Jamie Smart. and extensive coaching from Michael Neal. He'd been on programs with both of them. And like, these are kind of big names. And I'm like, oh my God. Right. And like, this guy was just a bundle of like tension and anxiety and sort of fear, basically. His threat response systems were kicking off all over the show. And I'm like, and I said, you know, I work in a similar way to those guys, right? And he said, yes. And I said, so what is it that you think that I'm going to be able to help you with? That,
right?
Like, well, you know, it's the way you communicate things. I find it more. I'm like, okay. Anyway, I did 6 months coaching with this guy. Mate, I didn't feel like I moved the needle anywhere. 6 months coaching. And that kind of, and I was shaken by this. It's like, I've really worked with this guy using this method, using this approach. I'm not saying it's a flaw in the method and approach. Maybe I could have made some different choices.
Right.
But it put me on a path again of going, well, maybe it isn't everything. And I kind of swung back into kind of NLP stuff at that point. But I could never get away from all that I now knew, because that stuff had helped me. I didn't learn that stuff to go and just be a facilitator of change with other people. The 3P stuff and all of that really helped me hugely.
Right.
And it changed my experience of myself in the world and all of this. So I knew there was value in it, but I kind of got back into the NLP stuff. And I did get into some of like the Bessel van der Kolk stuff. And I got back into some stuff I'd learned from David Grove about processing trauma and all of this. And I was away for 9 months, going around the world. When I came back, I had some different views. And I said to this guy, you know, we did that 6 months coaching and we didn't get anywhere. He's like, yeah. I said, look, I've got some different ideas. How about I do a couple of free sessions for you? See if we can. First session I did, massive shifts we've got, doing different methods, right? So that kind of opened my mind back up again to other ways. But so I guess what I'm saying now is I started to look at a lot of the NLP stuff. And instead of looking at it as reprogramming processes, so we're going to do this and it's going to reprogram you somehow. It's like, well, I started to look at them instead as experiences that could teach people things.
Right.
So with something like a submodality shift, if I work that shift, I want to absolutely make it clear that the fact that it feels better when they make a change is simply because the whole thing is mind-made. It's completely created. So for me, I'm very happy to be able to, and I would also be happy to be able to increase, you know, like have somebody fully immersed even more in it and still recognize. So, you know, I'm happy to kind of play the both and with that.
I really like that, because for me, it's not that NLP, I've thrown it out. As you pointed out, you see me work and there are certainly aspects of NLP, but I think of more NLP now as not processes that I run, but more a delivery system. It's a way of working with other ideas more effectively.
Right. This is a huge thing. I mean, there's this line, I got this, I shan't name who said this to me, but it's somebody who used to be part of the Banner and Grinder group in the 70s. Who said they'd spoken to Milton Erickson and he'd said, bandit and swindler really cracked the nut on my work. The trouble is they took the shell, but left the nut. Now, some people would say that's a really dismissive metaphor, but if you look at that, a shell serves a function in nature, right? The nut without the shell doesn't get delivered. It doesn't get to where it needs to get to. And I think, and I was reading recently, I've sort of been reading a lot of old NLP books again. I was reading Transformations and Connie Ray Andreas' introduction. She's saying, you know, she remembers visiting Milton Erickson and saying, how do you know what to do? And Erickson said, I trust my unconscious mind. He said, this book is for people who don't have Milton Erickson's unconscious mind, right? But I've been saying this for years. Erickson had a way of seeing the world. He had a philosophy of life, if you like, right? He had something that gets dismissed a lot in the world of NLP. He had wisdom. Right? A lot of people in the modern world will go, well, that's a very arrogant thing to claim you have wisdom. It's like, well, look, wisdom is available to everybody. It's just knowledge about that helps you live your life better. To me, that's all wisdom is, you know, perspectives, knowledge, ideas that help you live your life better. And this is where Erickson was coming from. You know, he may have like had a process emphasis to some degree, but he's still making his choices based upon beliefs that he has. And I think if you look at Erickson, one of his major ideas is stop trying to control things, right? That's like one of Erickson's major frames.
Right.
You know, most problems come from people trying to control things instead of just letting go and allowing things to unfold a little bit more. So Erickson's coming from this place. Erickson's got a nut. And I think that NLP people are served more powerfully when they develop a nut, so to speak, to give the parallel metaphor there. But you know, I
agree.
They get some kind of grounding. So it's not just a bunch of floating tools that you're sort of just throwing out there. You start to know what you're doing with it, you know, what kinds of shifts you want to bring somebody to. And I think that's a really important thing. So my nut very much underneath is that we do create our experience, and that's multi-layered. So I think I was saying to you before about some people are there's sort of 3 layers in my view to experience. There's sort of what's happening, then there's the thought that we have about what's happening that creates our experience, and then there's the thought we meet that created experience with. So you've got thought working on 2 levels. You've got this higher level, how we meet the experience that we've made through thought with further thought that then kind of feeds it forward. So I'm kind of like often looking at where I can intervene at these 2 levels. Is it how they're meeting their experience that could change here, or is it how they're creating their experience? And I'm kind of happy to work on both those levels and often toggle between the 2, if that makes
sense. No, it makes total sense. And it's kind of funny because one of the huge and the biggest shifts that I've had, and again, this is so funny to me, given that what we've already talked about and the big insights that I had early on, was that we don't control our thinking. And like this, and getting into some of the work of Sam Harris, and looking at free will, and looking at how thoughts just appear. I think that has been some of the biggest shifts for me personally as well. And the irony, and I still am amused by this, but the irony that I look back and realize that the 2 biggest things in my life that made a difference for me personally was, you know, at the age of 20, having this experience with Tony Robbins of you can control your thoughts. And then like 10, 15 years later, having this insight of like, you can't control your thoughts. And kind of making sense of that. You know, it's been tremendously valuable and tremendously helpful, I think, with clients. When you begin to help them with those things.
Yes, that's quite different. And that point, because I was curious when we had the conversation, I think we may have had some conversations about this at the UK Hypnosis conference. Because I was curious about that step in your willingness ladder, which we'll talk a little bit more about here. About where you get to, do you accept that these thoughts just appear, right? You're asking that thing because you're leaning towards, you're taking somebody to that conclusion. I don't control my thoughts, or I don't choose my thoughts. To me, there's a distinction there. There might not be a distinction for you, but there's a distinction for me.
Right.
I think this is a really important thing. And I think this is one of the areas where kind of classic NLP can be quite, to use an overused word, toxic. Is this idea of state control, right? This idea that you can control what's unfolding through your system, which, you know, to me is absurd, even from a kind of like evolutionary perspective or anything like that. You know, first of all, who is the you that's controlling it, if you're going to control it? And is that you that's controlling it really possessed of all the wisdom and knowledge that it can possibly possess in order to do a good control job, even if it could? And I've often said this, you know, if we could completely, like, yes, we have some choice in how we respond to, say, other people's communications and this kind of thing. But like those people that say, you know, you cannot, you know, we're always going to be influenced by the world around us, right? Stuff is going to come up. So the point of choice isn't with controlling what comes up through your system. It's like, well, how do you meet what comes up through your system? And of course, you are meeting it in a sense with chosen thoughts and chosen attitudes. This is why, for me, there's a distinction between control and choice. I don't think you can control your thoughts, but I do think you can choose how you meet them, and that is like we might frame this slightly differently, but in the work that you do, I see you coaching people in different choices in how they meet their experience, in how they meet their thoughts, so that they can not be intimidated by them and not be at effect entirely to them, this kind of thing.
So I had a bit of a crisis when I had this sort of like internal shift in the direction of we don't control our thoughts, or we can't even choose our thoughts. They just appear, and it was like, well, what on earth is my job then?
Yeah.
Like, I spent my whole life teaching people to control their thoughts or how to choose their thoughts differently. And if we don't choose it, what on earth is my role? Because whether or not I see someone, like, their thoughts will just go where they're going to go anyway. And I kind of made sense of it for myself in the way of, I've often asked people, like, have you ever been to a pizza restaurant? And then the question is, well, why didn't you order sushi? Because it's not on the menu. So you're more likely to order sushi if it's at least on the menu. So my job, or our jobs, I think, as change workers in many ways, when we're seeing people, is to be the menu writers.
Right. Yes.
We're adding options onto the menu.
I would totally.
Whether it happens or not, it's still not really my choice or their choice, but it's more likely to go that way.
Yes.
If there's functional things on the menu that get them the results that they want.
Right. So I 100% concur with that. There are philosophical rabbit holes that one can disappear down into a mind, house of mental mirrors. And all sorts of things with this. So without descending into the house of mental mirrors.
Let's not.
Going back to, say, something like the Structure of Magic. If you read the Structure of Magic, one of the things that strikes me about that is there's nothing in there about controlling anybody, or like people thinking that as NLP got into the 1980s, it starts to get this sort of like, it's all about realizing these outcomes, reprogramming stuff, controlling. That early book is very, very clear. It's about enriching maps of the world, giving you a different menu, or a better menu, or an enriched menu that you can make different choices from. And I absolutely love that. And I love, looking at how categorization works, how we make sense of the world through categorization, and how distinctions create choice. When we can make a distinction, oh my goodness, you can now see a thing in a particular way that you couldn't see before. It's only when you have a distinction, you have a choice. Right. And often, like, people don't have any distinctions in how they relate to their own thoughts and experience. They're so caught up in it. They don't have any distinctions, so they don't get to choose how they meet their own experience. They're just washed away by it, whatever's happening, whatever's going on.
Yes.
So I see the kind of like the work that you're doing. I mean, is fantastic. It's like a really good quality coaching job in bringing people to a set of understandings or distinctions that give them choice in how they meet their experience. And I don't mean superficial choice. I mean like a really deep choice, because when you really categorize something differently, because you could argue you're helping people recategorize their experience. It was in the category of perhaps threats, these thoughts that are coming up.
Yes, absolutely.
But now it's in a different category of like, well, thoughts, stuff unfolding, whatever it might be. So I really love that kind of approach.
But I think there is this almost comedy in it, which I've always been amused about. In that, so I've got this thing that I think that the client's problem is almost always the perceived solution they think they need.
Yes, 100% agree.
Right. And they're always looking for a way of solving the problem, but when they transform and relate totally differently, they don't need to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And the irony is that, you can get paid a lot of money as a change worker to essentially show them that they don't have to do anything.
Yes.
And there's no problem to solve.
Right. It's dissolving the problem rather than solving the problem.
Right.
I listened to all sorts of kind of crazy stuff, and I got this book a little while ago, and I really liked it. And it's by this kind of Russian mystic who's like into New Thought stuff and strange stuff, but he's an interesting thinker called Vadim Zeland. And one of his main tenets, and I really like the way he put this, it's not new to me, but it's a different way of putting it, and therefore I like different ways of putting things. Right. He talks about, the problem of excess importance. That most of anytime you have a problem in your life, just look for where you're putting excess importance. What are you putting excess importance on? Where is there excess importance? And when you reduce the excess importance you're placing on something, 99% of the time, the problem just goes away immediately.
Right.
And if there's anything left to sort out, it's usually 10,000 times easier to sort out anyway. So it's like the same idea. It's this kind of excess importance that people put on things. So like in the work that you're doing, or perhaps Jørgen is doing, people have got an excess importance on a particular thought. I mustn't have this thought, or I mustn't have this experience, or something like that. There's that excess importance on it. It's like, well, actually, do you know what? There's no rule in the universe that says I mustn't. And actually, when I have it, it doesn't really change anything about who I am. So, if it just floats through like weather, then, that's just not that important, is it?
Right.
And it's a crazy thing from a change work perspective, I think, because a lot of people who are change work practitioners, they get as hooked into their client's outcome as the client does. I used to feel terrible because I think, well, the client specifies it. I'd say, okay, so what exactly do you want? They give me this exact thing, and I'd feel like, well, I have to create that exact thing for them.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it would be like, but
been there, done that, got the t-shirt. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I sort of moved to this thing of like, well, we just do emergent stuff and all of this kind of thing. And it was for me getting myself off the hook for delivering a specific result. But now I'm completely the opposite. It's like, what do you want? What do you want to change? Because, of course, I was placing excess importance on them, thinking they must, it will be terrible if I pay James and I don't get this. Right. But now I don't feel threatened by that, because I'm not threatened by my own thoughts and ideas about it. So I'm quite happy to get a very, very specific outcome from a client and just use that as grist for the mill, so to speak, for dissolving the structures that are creating both the problem and the perceived solution, and then leading somebody to a place of going, oh, actually, it's not really a problem anymore, is it?
I mean, there's so much to unpack there, and that could be like a whole nother conversation in and of itself around all sorts of things. But just like, so I did this provocative TikTok about the fact that most therapists, and I use the word most because, arguably it's more controversial, are really working with themselves rather than the client. In that if they have these stories of, oh, am I a good therapist? Am I able to, what will it mean if I can't help them? They're paying me for. They're really operating through the whole frame, the whole time of, I have to do something to get a certain result because it says something about me.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but if I'm going to someone for change work, I would rather their focus is on the person they're changing.
Yes, absolutely.
Not on themselves. And it just seems so fun. But I think...
But we've both been there, Howard.
We've both been there. I have been there. I have been there. I've got the T-shirts, and it's...
Yeah. That's another thing about NLP, I think, that actually, I get what they were doing, right? Because you've got that situation where people go through years of therapy, maybe nothing changes, and NLP is saying no, and then there's the client blaming, the client was resistant and all of this. So NLP kind of flips it over and says there's no such thing as a resistant client, only an inflexible therapist, an inflexible therapist. And there's all these frames about the structure of magic and pictures of wizards on the books and stuff like this. It's like, I'm supposed to be a wizard, right? I'm supposed to be able to you use neurolinguistic programming to reprogram somebody to get exactly what they want with their well-formed outcome and all of this. And it's like, it all suddenly becomes really high stakes, really. And there's this pressure on it. It's just, and I've seen so many practitioners, and I was in this place myself at one point, who cannot be grounded with their client because they've taken on so much responsibility for bringing about the outcome, with their wizardry skills and all of this kind of thing. And I'm not saying that's true for everybody. There'll be people that are listening to this who go, yeah, I totally recognize that. Other people going, what? I never had that. I was always great right from the get-go. And I've never had a failure occur in a session. Or
I think certainly the big mighties, the greats, I was often led to believe from their demos that they have a 100% success rate and never fail. When I went out into the world and worked with a bunch, I think it was 5 smokers were the first clients I had over the first 5 months of my therapeutic career. Not one of them stopped smoking. Not one of them. It's so easy to go, oh, well, I'm a terrible person. I clearly not cut out for this. And especially, and I talked about this on on a podcast called Cringeworthy Conversations, where I made a confession, and I fear it's about to come out, but it was this moment 5 months in, failing with 5 smoking clients, that my mum rang me. And the context is I'd spent the last 4 or 5 years going on every NLP course I could go on and reading every NLP book and practicing. Finally, I'm out there in the world doing it with real people and working with real clients. And she rings me and she says, listen, I don't want to rain on your parade, but I've recently become kind of interested in hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And I just did a weekend course a few weeks ago. And I just wanted to share, because you're interested in this sort of stuff, but I work with a smoker. And they just rang me and they told me that for 2 weeks now, they haven't touched a cigarette. They haven't smoked. And it was amazing. I just read them the script and it just works.
Yeah.
And at this moment, I caught myself saying the thing that I wish I could turn back the clock and not say, which was, well, mum, you might have helped her stop smoking, but at least I know why what I did should have worked.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's a crazy thing. I mean, like when I started out, I was hit and miss. Right. You know, I was I'm not saying I'm not hit and miss now, but I don't frame it up in the same kind of way anymore. So
I get you.
You know, like I'll admit this, right? I have kind of a low bar for success, which is, does the client have a better experience in their life after the work than before? So I have like a really super nebulous outcome.
Right.
And part of the reason I have this outcome is exactly what we were talking about. I know what they think their solution is, even if we get it out, is going to come from the problem matrix, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
So the work is going to work in very indirect ways. And it's just like, so in the end, I've got this simple metric, better or worse. And if somebody says better or worse, by what criteria? I'm like, whatever criteria you choose.
Right.
Down to you, right? Better or worse. Now, since I've got this super laid back approach, it's extraordinarily rare that somebody doesn't get a positive shift in a positive direction by their criteria. Do you see what I mean? And that's not standardizable across clients in any way.
Right.
So I'm kind of super relaxed. But back in the day when I was more strictly, you know, I went for this, right? You've got to get exactly what your client wants, get that well-formed outcome, and be absolutely confident and convey that confidence to them that they will get this. You know, and it creates this huge chasm that has to be leapt perfectly.
Right.
It's what I call the promise the world trap. If you promise the world, you only have to deliver 1 iota short, and it's a failure.
Oh, yeah.
Right? You know, so, and again, I think a lot of this, I'm not meaning to bag out NLP. If it sounds like I'm bagging out NLP, that's not what I'm doing at all here. But I do think that it is that often gets created by exposure to NLP culture. You know, this what I call the promise the world trap. Now, what I want to say is, people are listening to this and going, so what are you saying, James? You're saying you don't get people their outcomes? It's like, I work with people's outcomes, absolutely. And I get good results. I get a good satisfaction rate with the work that I do. People say, thank you so much. I feel so much better, all of this. But what they usually get wasn't necessarily what they would have thought they would be getting ahead of time.
Which I think is beautiful.
Yeah.
Because I think the problem exists in their current thought.
Yes.
Pattern.
Yeah.
And how everything looks from there is not often what they need. And yes, I think it takes a competent or experienced change worker to be able to give people what they need and not what they say they need.
Yeah, I'll admit that I have my biases, you know, in terms of what I'm aiming for. So one of the things that I've said a few times is, like, if you put it in the hypnosis frame, a lot of people see hypnosis as about mind control, right? It's about controlling things. You know, we're going to give these suggestions, and now you're going to have this sort of lockstep response and whatever. But and to a certain degree, that's true of NLP. People think of NLP in that way. It's a control paradigm. And often people come in and they have problems, and their problems are, their solution comes from that same control paradigm. I need to control things. If I could just control my thinking, if I could just control my eating, if I could just control my emotions or whatever, there's a control paradigm, or control my spouse. There's a control paradigm underneath of it. And for me, I operate from what I would call a freedom paradigm. right? My aim is to liberate, not to control. Not to control somebody towards, I'm not trying to turn somebody from one kind of robot into a different kind of robot. You know, my bias is towards greater levels of freedom, greater levels of well-being, greater levels of choice, greater levels of adaptiveness in how they meet the world, this kind of thing. So I 100% have these biases, and I'm pretty confident that people are going to get benefit from that. I'm not forcing those ideas on people. It's just that when they get released from the grip of how they were holding their reality before, the psychological grip they had things held in, when that grip loosens, all sorts of other possibilities unfold, which generally tend to be generative.
So I think my bias is very much leaning towards that idea of helping people not be afraid of their own internal experience.
Right.
That they can't control.
Yeah.
Just the stuff that appears.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. That I relate to. And it might be we're talking about the same thing, but conceptualizing it differently. You know, because definitely for me, if someone is afraid of their own experience or whatever they're afraid of, they're not free from.
Yes.
There's a saying that I really love. I don't know where I first heard it, but it's what you cannot be with will not let you be.
Right.
And I absolutely love that, because if somebody can't be with, you know, they say, well, if I give this presentation and and everybody laughs at me, well, there's something they cannot be with there. So it's not going to let them be. It's going to keep being there as a driver under the surface until they go, do you know what? If that happens, what difference does it make?
Right.
You know, there's no threat, as you say, you know, the way you would put that. They're free from that idea that there might be a threat there. You know,
it's really funny. Because I've done a lot of various media and podcasts and LBC and TV, and over the years, and a friend of mine rang me a little while ago and said, I've got some radio stuff coming on. Have you got any tips? Because I'm getting really terrified. He said, you've done various things. Like I heard you on LBC the other day, and I went, and I think he was hoping that I would turn around and say to him, well, I get really nervous, but here's what I do. And it's normal to get nervous. But I actually said, well, I used to get nervous, but I don't really now.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
What do you do then? And I said to him the truth, and he thought I was taking the piss, which is I said to him, I just sit before I go on, and I consider that I could totally screw it up and it could totally go wrong.
And that's okay.
Yeah. And he was like, no, but what do you do? Like, I think he was expecting some sort of toxic positivity. I look in the mirror and I say the magic words. I'm a strong and confident presenter. And
yeah.
It's not. I genuinely do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I genuinely just go like, yeah, it might go wrong.
I did it. I mean, I did the same thing. I know, like when I first started working with Rock Recovery, working with the military vets, and this is quite a few years back now. But at first, I was aware that I was working with a lot of people in very dark places who were, you know, a lot of whom were suicidal and have made attempts and were, you know, and there was a sort of, I had to recognize that in order to be able to work well with these people and to be me at my best, I had to kind of be, and this is going to seem crazy to a lot of people listening to this, but I had to be okay with bad outcomes, right? Like I thought there's a fair probability that, and I haven't actually, like some people who are into the kind of law of attraction might say, James, don't say these things. I'm free of this, right? I haven't lost a client. You know, I've had clients that have come to me because they've made suicide attempts and this kind of thing. But I have to accept that might change at some point. And if I cannot accept that, I cannot really do the work. I cannot really show up and be me at my best if I'm afraid of anything.
Right.
So I had to kind of accept, I had to just be, and it seems like like people go, what is wrong with you? You're accepting that a client might, you know, kill themselves. And it's like, probably have to do a warning at the front of this for YouTube. And I know I'm going to have to do a warning. So like, you know, I never make much from ad revenue anyway, so it doesn't matter. This is demonetized. But do you see what I mean? It's like, I have to be okay with this. Yeah.
I'm reminded of the quote, and I love this quote. It's Byron Katie, and I absolutely like. She says, "If you fight with reality, you'll lose, but only 100% of the time."
Yes.
Like, is it possible that a client might at some point in the future? And the answer is Yes, it's not like gravity, this universal force that will always act regardless. It could happen. It's a possibility, and to not acknowledge that we live in a world where that is a possibility would be fighting. It's something that's could happen, might happen, and therefore we're likely to end up in a lot of psychological suffering. And you know, for me, it's go on.
I was going to say, you and I both love that Byron Katie bit. I remember her quoting it in a different way, so I always quote it to clients in a different way, which is, if you ever see someone in argument with reality, put your money on reality.
Oh, I like that too.
Yeah, so that's the one I always. I'm
sure she said it more than once. I'm sure
she would have said it in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, but no, I like that too. But yeah, absolutely. But that's really where and why I work in the way that I do these days, and why it's sort of meandered and taken the form of something that I now call the willingness ladder.
Yes. Well done for bringing it around.
You see how we did that?
Yeah. You should be on radio. Really, you should. Yeah.
And speaking of
the willingness ladder. Yes. So yeah, let's talk about the willingness ladder. I like the willingness ladder a lot. I really like what you've done with that. I really like that you've got the way it looks to me as an outside observer. The way I look at this is you've got like a series of gates you're sort of taking people through. Each one is a mind shift that creates the platform for the next mind shift, that creates the platform for the next mind shift, and brings people from a place of struggling against their experience or something in their world to being able to be with it, and even beyond be with it. But I won't ruin the punchline for anybody. And there's a lot of richness in it. I think that's an important thing to recognize. A lot of people might look at it and go, oh, I get this. There's these 6 questions, and NLP, I might go with the 6 questions and a few reframes or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, but there's a lot of depth and richness, and there's a nut underneath. We were talking about the nut earlier. Mm-hmm. So how did you come to develop the willingness ladder? What is it to you, and how did you come to develop it?
It was me actually trying to figure out something that I saw Jørgen Rasmussen do with a client he was working with who seemed to be incredibly psychologically orientated. And I also don't know the context of this guy. He might have done a lot of work with Jørgen before. He might have been on lots of seminars before. So he was like pretty switched on.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing the demo. Jørgen said to him, it was during COVID, and he had this horrible feeling of tightness in his chest, like he couldn't breathe. Like imagining lungs clogging up and COVID taking effect. And he was like, do you want that sensation? And the guy was like, no. He was like, well, could you be willing to have it? And the guy went, yes, thank you. I feel better now. And my brain just went, sorry, just go back a bit.
Yeah.
And I could not piece together at first, like, how did someone go from I don't want this to, oh, I could be willing to have that.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it be cool if you could? Because the relief it gave him was phenomenal. And so it was me playing with clients and really, really in a terrible, clunky manner, sort of saying to people, do you want that? No. Are you willing to have it? No.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm missing a few steps here. And it was just going back and going, well, what would be to use your frame, the gates that I'd have to open in someone's mind to help someone go from that to that in a subtle way, without really too much resistance, where each rung, as it were, and that's why it ended up being called the willingness ladder.
Yeah.
It's just another rung, another, nudge closer and closer to this. Because at first it was too big a step.
Yeah.
I'm reminded of that really terrible meme of, like, you do things one step at a time, and it's like the guy being overwhelmed by this big ladder with the steps are too big, and then just like, what are the little ladders, the little rungs? And that's all it was. What are the little shifts that you can do to help pretty much anybody go from I don't want that through to I'm willingness, and, as you say, and beyond. And I don't want to spoil that.
Yeah. I think it's just phenomenal. And to me, it's I mentioned that little line that has always been a bit of an anchor for me, is what you cannot be with will not let you be.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful process that is structured and therefore kind of learnable which I think actually counts for a lot, because you're pointing out there that obviously Jørgen made that move, and it's based on a whole bunch of kind of intuitions and this sort of thing,
Right.
that somebody from the outside, but they can't just do that.
Right.
There's no kind of format. I think what's really nice about the willingness ladder is it's very teachable and it can be done. I also think that, and we discussed this a bit, is that people would, and I think you would agree with this, yes, there's a structure there. Yes, there are tools that exist that you sit within that structure, certain ways of framing things, certain ways of presenting things, thought experiments, this sort of things that get a series of mind shifts. And again, one of the things I see from you, where I see perhaps an NLP influence being there, is the way you're inviting people to move their minds. Those thought experiments are very well facilitated. And also that sense that there's a kind of calibration loop running throughout the whole process. You're not moving on without getting the shifts. It's not just kind of banging through a series of steps and then testing at the end to see if you get some sort of change to happen. It's got that kind of ongoing calibration, that ongoing checking, that aliveness built in.
Right. I've been slightly, I mean, look, I released this as an online program a couple of years ago. Super pleased, had over 200 people around the world tune in and use it. But then again, I keep seeing on forums and Facebook, it's beginning to sort of make it into various groups, and people saying, "Oh, use the willingness ladder," or "Have you tried this?" And people going, "Here are the questions."
Yeah,
it's just these are the questions. And if someone's just giving people the questions, it's missing the nut.
Yes,
it's more than just the questions. I could give people the questions in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Without the calibration, the artistry, the developing of the understanding behind them and why you're doing them, and that's to move in that direction.
Right, and that's such an important thing, I think, because I've been saying this for years, is people ask coaching questions because they go, "Here's a great coaching question. Here's a great coaching question," and it's someone else's coaching question. Unless you understood what that person was trying to do with that question, you've got no way of calibrating whether you're using the tool of that question usefully, because you don't know what you're trying to achieve with it. Just asking the question, expecting it to do some magic all by itself, that doesn't work. I mean, occasionally, of course, there's always going to be exceptions. I can't say it never works. Someone might get a shift because you ask some random question that you read in a book. Of course, it's entirely possible.
Yeah.
But the point of the matter is like great coaching questions, the people who develop those questions, they're developing them as a tool to get a specific shift most of the time, or to get a specific effect. And I think what's really great about the willingness ladder is you've got these questions, but you're also unpacking them and you're bringing people to that kind of understanding as to what these questions are looking to achieve. Then people can actually, if they're working with a client, they can actually go, have we got to where we want to go to here? Yes. Have we got what we want before moving to the next rung on the ladder?
Yeah, it's a really nice way of thinking about, test, operate, test, exit, but you can do it at one rung at a time, so you don't get too far, and you can always backtrack about where the problem is.
But to me, Howard, and I don't know if you probably don't think about it like this, one of the bugbears that I've had for years about people learning NLP processes is that they run all these steps in a process, and then they get to the end, and then they test. I'm like, well, what were you doing throughout the rest of the process?
Right.
Do you understand what each step of the process is trying to achieve as a step in and of itself? Right? Now, most of the time when people learn NLP patterns, they don't learn that. So they just go step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, and then they test at the end, and maybe there's a difference, maybe there's not. But if they were actually paying attention as they went and knew what they were looking to achieve with each step, they could run the process much, much more effectively. You've got that with the willingness ladder. And I think, excuse me, I've still got COVID cough for anyone watching this, but I think that there's a lot to be learned from the willingness ladder as well about doing change work well. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. It's not, I mean, people might go, "Oh, I want to learn this technique and it's going to do," there's so much that you can learn from it that is going to be of value, I feel is of value, beyond even the sort of method itself and what it's trying to achieve as well. I don't know if you recognize
I
that.
do, and I'm trying so hard, and I don't quite have the right words for it, to stay away from the idea that I've created a protocol or a technique or a tool or a process or because however I wrap it up, it always feels like it's just, here's the 6 questions and that's what you do. And it's more than that.
Yeah.
It's more than that. It's about engagement and concepts and artistry and skills and calibration and all wrapped up. And yes, there's some overarching themes, but it's richly dense.
It is richly dense. And I see parallels in some ways to the work of Byron Katie, in that that gets boiled down. Byron Katie does it herself. She does this to herself by going, oh, it's 4 questions and the turnarounds.
Right.
But you watch Byron Katie work, and you will have watched Byron Katie work and got all these exquisite little bits of business that sit between the questions, right? And there's she's doing something specific with each of those questions, not merely asking it, then moving on.
It's the questions are more markers. That happens in between the questions. Yeah. It's really very little to do with the questions.
Right. And I've said this to people in the past. People used to say to me, that, well, they still do from time to time, oh, I want to train as a hypnotherapist. What hypnotherapy training do you recommend?
Yeah.
And I often will say I don't recommend any hypnotherapy training, because people, when they go on hypnotherapy trainings, they learn a lot of techniques, or some trainings, they just learn to read a lot of scripts, this kind of thing. But they come out with a sort of sense of overwhelm. They've got this stuff. They don't really know what to do. They're not really sure how to get a session to hang together well, this kind of thing. So I often used to encourage people to learn something simpler, right? If you really want to get going, you want to start helping people, I used to say, go learn the work of Byron Katie, right? Get really good with Byron Katie's work. If you look and you study some NLP, look at some of the NLP skills you could bring to making your facilitation of Byron Katie's work better. And when you hit the limits of that, look at how you can expand it. You could grow beyond it. Look to what you might have, but start with something kind of simple that actually gives you a really good framework for doing a session, some really good skills, some really good understandings. And I would often offer the work of Byron Katie as being a good place to start. However, what I will say is, I think what's missing from the work of Byron Katie is any explicitness around how to develop artistry in doing the work. So when Byron Katie, she has artistry herself, but she doesn't give any clues to anybody as how you can develop artistry as a facilitator of the work. Maybe she does in private trainings. I don't know what her trainings are like. But one of the things I see a kind of parallel there with the willingness ladder, in that you've got, obviously it's a different structure from the work. And it works in a different way, even though it does have some relationships, I think, in terms of what it's looking to achieve. But I think that what you've got with the willingness ladder that's of real value is a lot more explicitness in coaching people in developing the artistry as a facilitator of that. I'm just basing it on the online program that you've done, which is, I understand you're doing some live training on this. Am I right?
Well, I think based on the fact that the program online has gone down so well and the feedback's been so good, I'm doing a 2-day live at the end of the January, so January 27th and 28th, 2024. So as we're recording this in about 2 months' time. And it's just 2 days where we can take people, whether they've gone through the online program or they're totally new, we can build up the concepts from scratch. We can take them through all the questions, but with a real focus on doing and getting it into their body. The skills, the artistry needed, and to be able to figure out where and how to apply it. Because, whilst the online program sort of goes through lots of these ideas, I think I'm reminded there was a board game my parents had called Othello, and the title on it, I always remember the tagline. It was "A minute to learn, a lifetime to master."
Ah, yes.
So I think the willingness ladder, it's like, you can learn it in about 3.5, 4 hours on the online program, but to master it and to really figure out, okay, I've got this client sitting in front of me, and this is what they're saying. They're saying they've got this presenting issue. Well, how am I going to tweak it? How am I going to adapt it? How am I going to do that? So it's really a place where we can explore that. So it makes it useful for people that have gone through the online program, or if you're totally new. I'm just super excited because it's so versatile, and I'm excited to share this stuff.
Right, and I can imagine one of the things one of my personal kind of bugbears, I think, about the world of NLP and change work and this kind of thing is you get a lot of people coming to learn techniques to do things to other people, right? So,
right.
Well, I'm kind of fine, or at least if I'm not fine, I will be fine when I'm a brilliant change work practitioner. So I'm just going to work on my brilliant change work practitioner skills. I'm going to get really good at changing your mind. Whereas they haven't necessarily done any kind of inner work or too much inner work themselves. And I always see the very best practitioners, the people that I know that are really, really good at the work, they've done a lot of development themselves. You know, they've done the work from the inside out, so to speak. So I think, like, if you take something like the willingness ladder, I know that the understandings that the willingness ladder is based upon are powerfully transformative, not because I've worked with those sorts of understandings with clients and they've made lots of shifts. Yes, that is true. But first and foremost, because I've applied, I've explored that myself in my own life. Like you were saying earlier, people say, well, what do you do to deal with your anxiety? And you're like, well, I don't really have it now.
Right.
I'm the same. I used to have crippling anxiety and be terrified of everything. I remember saying to a friend of mine, I've just realized that fear rules my entire life. That was an insight that I had in my early 20s. And now I'm like, I'm not saying I don't get a tickle of hesitation around certain things, but it's not overwhelming. And it's based upon an understanding of human experience, which includes my experience, and a real embodied understanding that is profoundly transformative. Now, I know the willingness ladder comes from that kind of seeing.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And I think if people are trying to facilitate without having been kind of taken to the place to facilitate from, it's going to be tricky to do. And I'm imagining that, and I don't know, I'm not trying to put thoughts into your mind, but I'm imagining that one of the advantages of doing that 2-day training is if people haven't fully got to that place yet, they're going to get the opportunity to be taken through the experience as well and get to know those shifts from the inside out.
100%. And I have this idea or this frame that I often joke with people that, if my 8-year-old ran into my bedroom and said, Daddy, there's a monster under my bed. First of all, I ask, how effective would it be if you just said to him, there's no monster, but whatever you do, don't look it in the eyes. Well, obviously, in telling him he mustn't see it, it adds credibility to it. I think lots of people engage with their problems in that way.
Yeah.
It's the monster under the bed. But then the analogy extends further, which is an adult or a grown-up cannot help the kid who thinks there's a monster under the bed if the adult still thinks there's a monster under the bed.
Yeah.
So this is about helping people see there's no monster under the bed first, and now you can go out and help other people as well. Otherwise, you just can't do it that way around. You can't.
Yes.
No, it's okay. There's no monster.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't carry.
Yeah. This is a huge thing. I know. I mean, I got some coaching. I got about 5 coaching sessions from Jamie Smart back in probably like 2013, something like that.
Right.
And Jamie was trying to get me onto a bigger program that I just did not have the money to afford. But these 5 coaching sessions, they were incredibly valuable to me. And they kind of put me on a path of exploring some different things, some different ways of making sense of myself in the world and my experience and this kind of thing. But there was a term that Jamie used a lot, which I have sort of taken on board. And I often talk about, people watching this may have heard me talk about it, which is groundedness or grounding. Jamie would talk about grounding. I often talk about groundedness. And that kind of groundedness is just that it's a place to come from. And one of the points that Jamie made is like, you're just going to be better off in almost any area of your life when you're able to come from a grounded place or come from groundedness. And this is really super true, I think, in doing effective change work facilitation. It's I'm not saying that people cannot do effective change work facilitation if they're still getting caught up in a lot of their own fears and insecurities and all of that. I'm not going to say you cannot do it. That isn't true. I've seen plenty of people done it. I've done it myself. So I'm not going to say that isn't,
Agreed.
I'm not going to say it's not possible, but I am going to say that when you unhook from that and you get to that kind of place of just, all is well and all manner of things will be well, and we're going to do some work here, or going back to that frame of excess importance, if you as the practitioner are attaching a lot of excess importance to things and it mustn't be that way and I must get this, it's not so easy to do good work generally, regardless of the work that you're going to do. But certainly to do this kind of work where you're bringing people to that place of being unhooked, unhooked from their fears, it makes sense to be more unhooked from whatever fears you may carry. And we're all human beings. So everybody's like, it's no judgment upon anybody to say like we get hooked up in our fears or whatever. It's just extremely useful to be able to unhook rapidly from those and be in that much more grounded place. I suspect that if people have not, I suspect that isn't something people would necessarily get. I love the online program. I really do. I think it's really good. I'm not trying to do it down by,
No.
you can't do everything that you would want to do
Right.
in a presentation-based online program. It's absolutely a phenomenal resource. But I can see so much extra value that you will be able to offer from doing the live training and taking people through those experiences, having them from the inside out.
The way I'm doing it as well is that anyone that comes on the live, they get immediate access as well to the online program. So it's not either or. I think they're just, because there's a community on there of people asking questions and sharing. So, I want everyone to be part of it. So it's a useful resource. And I think certainly it makes a lot of sense, especially after the training. Training, you can go back and you can look and you can refresh and remind and continue your learning and developing. So
I think fantastic stuff. So I want to thank you for coming on and talking about that, Howard. And I want to say to anybody, anybody watching this, the reason that Howard's on this, we're having this conversation, is because I really value this work. And I will be 100% transparent and say that Howard offered me an affiliate link for promoting the training, which I have refused that affiliate link. And the reason I refused that affiliate link is because I genuinely believe that this is good work. I have an intrinsic motivation to want to share this work with people. And if people know anything about motivation and how it works, if you accept extrinsic rewards, it can tend to undermine your intrinsic motivation. So I've made the choice to decline that. And I want to make it clear to anyone listening to this that I really value this work, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you here and open people up to the opportunity to learn this. So I thank you for coming on, Howard. Is there any final thoughts that you want to add about anything that we've discussed or everything?
Not at all. Not at all. It's I'm just super excited because I feel like there's something really profound to share.
I'll tell you what's profound to share. Or maybe not so profound, but kind of pragmatic.
Go on.
When are you doing this live training?
January 27th.
27th.
27th and 28th. The 27th and 28th of January 2024. It's a weekend.
Okay.
Back into January 24. But we'll put the links.
Yeah, we'll put the links. Where's it going to be? Just out of curiosity. Down around
a place called Elstree and Boreham Wood, which is about
Wonderful.
20 minutes on the overground from King's Cross. So it's really just out on the outskirts of London. So London.
Yeah, Elstree is like pretty much the Hollywood of Britain.
That's depressing, isn't it? As a thought. Yes.
All right, Howard.
Marvelous.
I appreciate you being on here. I've enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm sure there's plenty of other stuff we could maybe dive into. If people watching this have liked this, please do give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more of Howard, then let me know and we'll do a part 2 of this conversation at some point.